I mean, Jackson. Hey, Peter, how you doing? Popeye, how's it going?
Good to see you, Mark.
Good to see you. I mean, Jack, I think that we just want to give our people clear guidance on. I don't think anybody. I think people are worried about the share price, and yet nothing coming. We're hearing from you says, that this is an inevitable crash landing, throw in the towel, and I just think we've probably been a little remiss in consummately, thoroughly updating our people on really what's going on. In recent days, Cleveland, I hope you can hear us, Cleveland. I think your mic is on. Cleveland has built this very robust case for, look, if the company has to survive, buy veterinary sales, look at what it could do. I mean, this could really tide things over, and we think we predict drive share price up, awaiting the advent of the human clinic, presuming that's still a goal of the company. And so I guess maybe we can talk around those issues. And Cleveland, you want to pipe up and say anything? Can you hear me? Or whoever, Karen, Tom.
Well, okay, go ahead.
Well, I can start, and why don't you guys ask more detailed questions about, touch any particular topic as you like. And so obviously nobody's happy with the share price today, right?
Right.
It's certainly, if you look at the entire market segment, 2021 saw a massive decline in microcap diagnostic companies, and certainly LexaGene was part of that story. If you look at where we are with vet diagnostics, look at Cleveland's model, we see great things in the vet diagnostics market. And I want to assure your group that what we're seeing from the inside encourages us that 2022 is going to be a great year. So if you go back to what we viewed to be our official product launch, which was this past September, it's important to recognize that we're launching technology in the middle of a pandemic, right? And so that has its own challenges in regards to, one, the conference attendance is down to about a third of what typically would be pre-pandemic. But that's just reality. But an added complication is the fact that veterinary practices, if you will, are effectively shut to practically any sales rep who wants to get in and have a meeting. If you even have a sick dog, you can't even go into the veterinary practice. Most veterinary practices, you have to drop your dog off in the parking lot and they bring the dog into the practice. So certainly sales-wise, there's additional hurdles that you wouldn't have to deal with in a non-pandemic year. So here we are launching technology during the pandemic. There are certainly challenges of 2020 and 2021. That said, we are all hopeful beyond hope that 2022 and this current Omicron phase is hopefully going to burn itself out quickly. But it's been fast and furious over the last couple months. Practically everybody in the United States has been infected already. But if you listen to the experts, we certainly think that there's going to be a relatively rapid, hopefully tail off infections entering later in the winter and early spring. We believe this sets us up for a very, hopefully opening up again of the veterinary space and the economy, et cetera. And so what does this mean for us? When we go to trade shows, it's critically important to have a huge audience. Even at the lower audiences that we've had in September, I was just at VMX in Orlando, Florida, like 10 days ago or so. We've had tremendous interest from the veterinary participants there, which is fantastic. But it's not just the veterinarians who are swinging by our booth. It's also the bigger strategic companies that are swinging by our booth. And I'm certainly talking to a lot of the executives of these bigger companies because everybody universally believes that in-clinic PCR is going to play a major role in veterinary medicine in the future. We happen to be the first company to be pushing it.
Jack, when you say a huge audience of these shows, give us a sense of scale. What's a number that's huge for these?
So VMX, it's the first time I personally have been to VMX. If you look at what the organizers stated, I believe that they were predicting around 14,000 total participants.
Wow, that is a big meeting.
Yeah, but of those, just recognize a little bit of caveat here. Of those, about 5,000 or so are veterinarians. But typically, the rest are exhibitors, support staff, whatever. And so that might. And so, but in a typical year, you basically have 3 times that number of people. The exhibitor hall is absolutely enormous. And certainly we had constant traffic through the booth, which is fantastic. But in a non-pandemic year, we'd expect 3 times the number of people swinging by the booth, which obviously is 3 times the number of leads, et cetera. So those are things that any company wants. But here we are in the pandemic, launching a technology where the pandemic has certainly provided a headwind for us. But at these conferences, it's very important to recognize how the veterinary space is set up. You have these massive corporations who have really consolidated, if you will, the veterinary hospitals that are really our target customer. That consolidation is both good and bad for us. It's good because once we get a corporation that owns many hospitals, say 50, 150 hospitals, as we get them to be a customer, we expect them to try out a couple systems, buy a couple systems, try them out for a period, and then if they like it, which we certainly believe that they will, then they'll all of a sudden push out their entire hospital network. You go from a sale which is a couple units to a sale which is potentially 50 or 80 units, where all of a sudden you start adding these things together and you see massive numbers coming out of the veterinary field in time. That said, in time is critical here because these corporations just are notoriously slow. They have purchasing committees. They're either that or part of group purchasing organizations where they meet like quarterly to talk about things that they're interested in buying. As a result, the sales cycle is slower than we anticipated.
Jack, if you got an order for 80 machines, like would that be a vortex, a downdraft all of a sudden that you've got, would you slam into a supply wall? Can you ramp up that quickly?
80 systems would push us. We'd be able to certainly fill about 50 of those systems into the field pretty quickly. The others would be issues where we have to order additional inventory, build the systems, and then provide them. We don't have an inventory that right now that can support us shipping 80 instruments, say within the month.
Okay. Cleveland has posted a few questions. Can I just maybe pitch these? I think they're kind of consistent with what you're talking about now, but one is he's wanted to know a raw number, how much capital do you have on hand, and how imminent is the need for the next financing?
Yeah, Cleveland's all about the numbers, and we love you, Cleveland, for it. And so, numbers are important. Cash is important. Cash is king. And so, we still have enough cash in our treasury to last us into March. And so, obviously, that's not a ton of time. We know people are worried about financing. We internally are not worried about financing. We're certainly working on multiple ways to capitalize the company. We are looking at both non-dilutive and other traditional equity financing. Okay. And it's important to recognize that we, as managers of the company, look to pursue multiple paths in parallel because every path is slightly different, and there's different options for the company, and it's important for us to pick the best option for the company at the time. And so right now we're talking to a lot of different groups. We are not worried about our ability to raise capital because of the conversations we're having and the point of the process that we're in.
Okay. Let's see, Cleveland's asking, how many MICU labs do you have in the 4,200 pet hospitals being tested by them?
So right now, we have a total of 9 sales, and recognize that obviously that's not a huge number, but importantly, we closed 5 sales in December. And so that we view to be a positive sign. We are certainly expecting to close more sales very soon. We're in the, if you will, final negotiations of several groups, and we expect these to convert. And so we do see 2022 as a momentum building year for the company. And we think every passing quarter, we would expect more and more sales. And so this is part of the sales cycle. If you were to ask me to estimate the average sales cycle for our technology, I would argue it's probably around 6 months. And we start counting really, if you will, at the September conferences this past year. So right now we're at 4 months in. We had some early adopters buying, in December. We're expecting more sales to be closing relatively soon. And we do expect that we're going to be building momentum throughout the year.
Okay. Let's see. He's asking, per Cleveland, to raise capital now, why not sell the vet segment to someone like Mars or Nestle? Use that capital to get into human diagnostics. Interesting.
Yeah, things like this are certainly things that we consider as a company, and it's also one of those things where it's a much more complicated process than it sounds. It's important for us to recognize that those conversations are important for me to have. I'm talking to the biggest players out there. That's part of my job. And, part of my job is trying to figure out how to put the company in a strong position moving forward. To Cleveland's point, we have multiple market verticals that this company and the technology can service. Vet diagnostics happens to be the one that we are farthest along in. That said, we see great promise for the biologics manufacturing sector, and certainly in time, food safety, and certainly in time, human clinical diagnostics, not to mention biothreat and other open access opportunities. So the idea of, if you will, partnering with a strategic for exclusivity in a particular market is certainly something that we are very, I would say, open to. We have certainly had negotiations, early stage negotiations on that, but it's one of those things where the idea of it sounds wonderful and something we certainly might end up doing in the future, but it's not a decision that a big corporation, and for that matter, LexaGene, enters into without very, very thoughtful deliberation regarding whether or not it's the best thing for the company today. And so 100% on the table. Any partnership, licensing arrangement is certainly on the table to benefit the company. And truthfully, a partnership with a big strategic in a segment like vet certainly could help fund the company for other pursuits and other market verticals, and take away from the capital raising requirements where we would get non-dilutive financing in, and arguably a partner in R&D development for improvements on the technology. Because it's important to recognize that our technology and any good company is always investing in R&D to make the system better across multiple different metrics, whether it's size, speed, breadth of detection, the cost of manufacturing, et cetera. And so these comments from Cleveland are spot on, where yes, in principle, a partnership, non-dilutive, makes perfect sense. It's my job to look into this, to make sure that it makes sense for the company, because there are times where timing is everything. Right now, our stock is depressed. We don't want to give away the farm, given where we are, where we could, in 6 months, be in a much stronger position to negotiate a much better deal. And so those are things that are certainly my job, and for that matter, the board's job, to evaluate to see if it makes the most sense for the company at the particular time that we're in. And right now, I can tell you that there are things that are in discussion, but that's about as far as I can go regarding where we are.
Jack, I mean, if a conspiracy theorist came along and said, "Okay, look, the company it had a rough couple of years. The stock price is down 25 cents, and this veterinary thing, it's a sideshow compared to where we began. They're doing this as to roll over because they've encountered resistance getting this to the human clinical market, and this is just they're trying to change the company into something other than what we thought we were buying into." I mean, that's not what I believe, but I think there are people out there that may think that way. How do I rebut that? What do I say to those people to refute it definitively?
Okay, so if you've been following the company for a long time, and Doc, I know you and your group have been, early on, pre-pandemic, there was no mention really of human clinical diagnostics in any of our marketing material.
Yeah,
I recognize
Aaron made that point. Yeah.
Right, I recognize as somebody who's been in this space, like looking back in my career, I helped QuantaLife develop their technology, launch their product. Bio-Rad bought QuantaLife, and Bio-Rad took years before going through the FDA, and that's Bio-Rad, a massive corporation, which certainly has other products through the FDA. The reason why Bio-Rad did that is because they recognize that it takes time, and it just takes time to get through the FDA. Looking at LexaGene, we are a company of 40 to 45 employees. Right now, we launched our product focusing on non-regulated markets, it's RUO markets.
Right.
Then the coronavirus pandemic hit. And so in many ways, I am very, very bitter that the coronavirus picked these years to hit us, because arguably this technology, I invented it to help try to avert a pandemic. And to have a pandemic hit during effectively product launch is very, very, painful. It takes a lot of effort to get to the FDA with a very mature company. When the coronavirus pandemic hit, our technology is really ideally suited for doing respiratory pathogen detection. Our technology is suited for doing panel-based detection, looking at many different pathogens at once. The FDA issued an EUA for COVID-19 testing. That EUA is for COVID-19 only. And so companies that already had a system that you would call to be a syndromic testing system, like the GenMark ePlex system, already through the 510K process, they only had to take one additional target coronavirus and put it onto their platform. We were in a situation where we had to build up the quality management system of the company. We had to get the technology to the point where it could be ISO 13485 built here in-house. It's a lot to ask of a small company. That said, we're very proud of the fact that we got to the point where we had completed our analytical studies. Our sensitivity system was great. We started pushing towards going towards point of care studies, and the FDA pulled a fast one, frankly, and they really sort of blocked our ability to continue down the EUA path. If you read their guidance that was issued on November 15th, they basically said only vendors that can manufacture 500,000 tests per week should pursue the EUA.
Word.
And clearly, our technology is not an antigen test, nor is it a test for reference labs where they're processing on massive robots. And so as such, the FDA basically told us, listen, if you are a vendor manufacturing a test that is a lower throughput technology, we are forcing you to go through the 510K path. Now, mind you, when the pandemic hit, the bar for going through EUA was down here, but it was really intended for companies that already had, products on the market that just didn't yet have the data for COVID, but they're already sort of through the FDA anyway. And for us, we're down here. We're just launching our very, very first product. It's a very tall ask. We knew it was a tall ask. Nonetheless, we felt obligated to attempt to get through the FDA. We had made good progress, and then the FDA basically came in and said, listen, the EUA is being cut for basically smaller or lower throughput manufacturers, and that has forced us down the 510K path.
Does everybody, for our group, you understand the difference between 510 and PMA, or would it be worth? Do you want to explain that maybe briefly, Jack? Just the difference, the two pathways.
So sure, and Doc, chime in here if you have a different opinion on it. And so PMA stands for pre-market approval. 510K is another path. Most diagnostics that are class 2 medical devices that are doing infectious disease testing that is not HIV or cancer end up falling under the category of 510K.
Right.
If you are more HIV/cancer, my understanding is more of a PMA application. Likewise, I think a lot of drugs go through PMA as well, but I'm not 100% sure of that.
Yeah.
And so the 510K is arguably a little bit easier than the PMA. That's where we fall. And so nonetheless, if you look at the typical workflow or the typical process of getting 510K, if you're looking at a panel, and again, it's very, very important for people to recognize who our customer is and where our competitive advantage is. I think there's been a lot of frustration from some shareholders looking at the long lines for coronavirus testing, seeing the massive demand for coronavirus testing. I see it, we know it, we can all feel it. The reality is that our system is designed to do panel-based detection. That is our strength. Another strength of ours is handling very difficult matrices. Difficult matrices are ones that have inhibitors to PCR that need to be purified away. So you have nice, clean genetic material to amplify on the back end. If you look at coronavirus, the nasal swab sample is a very, if you will, clean sample. There really aren't a lot of PCR inhibitors in there. So as such, you can arguably skip sample prep. If you're only looking for coronavirus, you also have the ability to do, if you will, a short and dirty amplification process, whereas we certainly can do that with our MyQ lab. But is it our strength? And is it where we shine? No, it is not. Our strength is handling things like urine, fecal swabs. We're certainly starting to do some blood work. These are difficult matrices to handle, and it's not every technology can do that. And so we have to play to our strengths. Sample prep is the strength. Also, large panel. That means detecting not just coronavirus, but influenza A, influenza B, RSV, adenovirus, et cetera. There's about 20 different viruses that cause symptoms that are similar in onset to coronavirus, minus the loss of smell. And so if you look at where LexaGene can compete, we ultimately have to have people buy our technology. Who's buying the technology? It's not the person waiting in line at a coronavirus rapid test site that's buying the technology. It really is a company that needs to buy the technology. If that company is looking to buy a technology for coronavirus only, they look at our platform, they look at some of the other, like a method biotech system, which is a very small coronavirus only platform. That serves the coronavirus need. It does not serve the need of doing panel-based detection for respiratory illnesses. And there is a market niche where that is very, very important to do. And there are studies out there saying how expensive it is to do hospital care without a proper diagnosis. And so long story short, we have to focus on our strength with the 510K. It allows us to go back to where we believe we're going to be most competitive in the market.
Okay. Let's see. Josh Jacobs is a PhD physicist. One of us. He's asking how much the fielded units in the vet hospitals now. How much airplay are they getting? How much what are you seeing in the way of recurring cartridge and kit orders for a given unit at a time? Something like that. What's the uptake like? I guess.
It's different for every single hospital. So some hospitals are using it a lot. They're using it, 3 to 4 times a day. Other hospitals are using it less. And so one of our goals as a company is to make sure we're maximizing usage. And so in order to do that, we have to make sure that we're providing them the right test. At this last conference we attended, we had a poster board. And the poster board effectively listed our current offering. But it also listed things like our pneumonia panel that's under development, our GI panel that's under development. But it also asked people swinging by the booth, how would you improve upon our current panel to maximize your usage? And we got some very, very interesting, if you will, boots on the ground market research done. One of the things that we're recognizing is a lot of veterinarians want to see fluoroquinolones on the current panel. Fluoroquinolones are not considered a frontline therapy for urinary tract infections unless it's pyelonephritis. And so because of that, we left it off of the initial panel. But the reality is, even though it's not recommended by ISK guidelines to prescribe fluoroquinolones of suspected UTI, people are, and people want to know if there's resistance. And so what we do at these trade shows is we say, listen, here's our current offering. What would it take for you to buy the system or use the system more frequently? Our goal is to, as the technology develops, be able to add more functionality to the system, more tests to the system. So it's used for all sorts of infectious disease testing needs in the hospital. And so we expect to do that. We expect as time goes by, our usage per hospital will increase. And a lot of education needs to go into this. Getting all the doctors that are practice involved, because sometimes you get a doctor at practice who's all gung-ho, and you have other doctors who are more sort of, if you will, old-fashioned, and they sort of, don't want to sort of change their current habits.
Everybody kind of like my vintage or veterinarians of the same vintage. I mean, we were all taught, it was verging on, to think of fluoroquinolones almost as first line things because they were so idiot proof and so highly bioavailable given orally. They were just viewed as wonderful things. And of course, now we think differently. There's all kinds of toxicity, and that class of drug has had more members pulled off than any other class of agent in history. But I suspect it's the same with animals as with people too. But I can see why that would befuddle you as a request from them. So,
right. And Mark, I want to add one point here, which I think you'll find interesting. We all know that resistance to antibiotics is going up, and quite drastically. If you go into Google and start searching antimicrobial resistance, what's happened during the pandemic, the reality is resistance going up faster than we were anticipating.
Yeah.
And the Gates Foundation funded the Wellcome Trust recently, and they just put out new projections on how many people are dying every year due to antimicrobial resistance. The last number was 700,000 people worldwide. The new number, I think it's 1.5 million people worldwide. Let me get that exact figure for you because it's close, but maybe not exactly accurate. But the point is, there's been a massive uptick in the number of people dying of antimicrobial resistance. And this think tank is predicting by the year 2050 we're going to have 10 million people per year dying from antimicrobial resistance. And right now, sort of like global warming, it's happening faster than we think it should be happening. So it's putting fear in the eyes of the FDA. And so when I was at this conference, I talked to some of the management of AHA. This is the American Animal Hospital Association. They set the guideline for excellence in veterinary care. They're in conversation with the FDA, and the FDA is basically saying, listen, we're going to start really clamping down on the availability of drugs. So the ability to go into a fish store and buy an antibiotic without a prescription, that's going to go away. The ability to go into a feed store and buy an antibiotic, which typically would be fed to cattle or whatever, that's going to go away. And they're even threatening, taking, the pharmacy away from some vet practices. And so right now, there is underway a massive push for antimicrobial stewardship. Organizations like the Mars organization, which owns Antech Diagnostics, they have effectively a company mandate to do better antibiotic stewardship. That includes better diagnostics up front. And that's exactly what we do. And so AHA is going to be updating their standards, we believe, in Q2 of this year regarding antimicrobial stewardship. We think this bodes extremely well for LexaGene. And we hear from the bigger strategics in the space saying, listen, we need to have antimicrobial stewardship programs in place. We want to do better diagnostics. We don't have a tool for it. You guys have the tool. We're interested. So those are the conversations that I'm having. It gives us confidence that this is a good market for us. But back to Cleveland's point, it's one market for us. And so 2022, we do believe we're going to see a massive, we're going to be having this conversation again, Mark. I certainly hope, late summer, late spring, early summer, and again, the fall. And I certainly hope we're looking back and listen, we have all these systems down in the field. This has happened, and we're really building momentum.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it sounds like, I'm speaking of it in stock market terms, it sounds like a bottom is in and the nadir is in and we're kind of turning. So yeah, Cleveland's got several others logged here. Let's take these one at a time. He's asking, first of all, you have 4 veterinary salespeople. How can, is that adequate? How can 4 people penetrate the market given its U.S. vastness?
It is not adequate, and we know that. And also, it's not just salespeople; it's marketing. And so, at this last conference, Antech launched a parasite PCR panel, and it's called Key Screen. It looks for 20 parasites and antimicrobial resistance in parasites. I didn't even realize that parasites had antimicrobial resistance, but evidently they do.
Yeah, they're notorious for it. Yeah.
Right, and so I learned something at this conference. When Antech launched this product, and I was talking to Christian Lutenegger, who was basically the inventor and the mind behind the product. Antech had this platform, and he was giving media interviews, for an entire half of a day. And Antech made a huge deal out of this at the conference. Every single person walking to that conference knew Antech had launched a new product. The media generated in and around that announcement was massive. We have at LexaGene, we are not Antech. We have a limited crew on marketing and sales, and that really does hurt us. And this is part of the reason why a partnership might make perfect sense in the veterinary space, where all of a sudden some arrangement might be struck where we can tap into some of that strength, tap into some capital, and put the company in a very, very strong position. And so who knows what will happen in the future, but it certainly is not adequate where LexaGene is today with our marketing and our sales, because of everybody who attended that conference, is still a tiny minority still knows about LexaGene. And the only way we can make that more of a majority is money, or otherwise a partnership where you now have a lot of people talking about it. We do think, again, I'm a little bit of a broken record here, that as we build our engine and we start attending more of these conferences, those repeat shows are extremely, extremely valuable, because people will swing by the booth and listen, I saw you in Vegas, or I saw you in Nashville, or I saw you, down in Orlando. You know what? We went back, we talked about our practice. We're super interested. They've had time to sort of, if you will, internalize what PCR might mean from their clinic.
Right.
And all of a sudden they're jazzed and ready to go. So there is that thought process and that repeated touch points of the customer, making sure that they're seeing us either by email campaigns, by advertisements in print, at trade shows, at talks, etc. And so it's all going to happen.
That's fantastic. Cleveland's noting break even is, let's see, 80 systems, and with each MyQLab generates $60,000 to $80,000 annually for revenue. The company, is that accurate, you think? And
so I would say those numbers are probably more accurate for the CDMO market than the vet market. We don't expect that much usage in the vet market, so I would say the numbers of vet systems need to be a bit higher to get to the break-even point. Those numbers, I would argue, would hold true for CDMO customers only. CDMO meaning contract drug manufacturing organization. And so right now, if you look at sort of front burner, second burner, third burner, et cetera, for us, vet is our front burner because we put the most amount of effort into it. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be our winning horse in the end.
Right.
And so our winning horse certainly could be the CDMO market. It could be human clinical. We certainly are driving towards human clinical, but the CDMO market is a really attractive market to us, arguably 3 times greater in size. These manufacturers don't care about the cost of the test, and they need to test a lot to ensure their product is safe. And they're doing this massive testing during scale-up of the product, including testing of raw materials going in, including environmental testing within their facilities. And they're not price sensitive. They don't have to sort of negotiate with the pet owners, say, listen, do you want to do this test? We can do this, we can do that. It's more like, okay, this product is going to be worth $15 million to our organization. We are perfectly happily fine to spend $10,000 just during the course of this month just to do testing, and we're going to do it every single month. Yeah. And so, yeah, Cleveland, to quickly answer your question, as far as the amount of revenue a CDMO customer would generate versus a vet customer, we stack CDMOs higher. That said, there are certainly some vets who we expect to be super users who will generate a lot of revenue, others who will generate just enough revenue to justify having the system. And so there's going to be a scale.
Yeah, okay. He's also asking, go ahead, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just curious, Jack, where do we stand in the CDMO market?
Great question. And so, as you guys recall, this is our panel, and we are arguably about halfway through developing a lockdown panel for them. Now you ask the question, why aren't we farther along than halfway through? The reason being is because right now we feel like on the vet side, we're getting some comments of like, hey, you know what, you need to have fluoroquinolones in there, or you need to drop this or do this or whatever. And so we're making some tweaks to our veterinary panel, which we think are critical to have that positive user experience from the veterinarians. We want to make sure that we don't, if you will, turn our biology resources away from vets too early to support CDMO at the risk of having an experience that's a bad experience in the vet market. And so right now, our current biology team who develops the assays, it takes time and money to develop these assays to do it well. And Mark might be able to test that PCR is finicky, where some tests, can generate higher false positives than others. And it's important for us to go through, figure out what tests are performing to our satisfaction, and lock those in. And if one's not hitting our satisfaction, we change it, and that takes development time. And so that said, that's happening concurrently. We still have an effort certainly towards CDMO, but we don't want to put 100% of our biology effort into CDMO until we're ready and feel like the vet product is as good as we possibly can make it from the assay side.
We ran that, by the way, that Annals article about the high pseudonegativity rate for PCR detection of coronavirus. And did you, I'm not pushing you on the spot, did you think any more about that? That just blows my mind, Jack. Why would that be happening? There must be an inhibitor in there of some kind, right?
It blows my mind too. And so there's a couple things. One, certainly the inhibitor is, okay, I would argue 3 things. One, sample collection. I have a 12-year-old son, and he, tests for coronavirus. He self-tests himself, where he swabs himself and provides it to the school, and they test it. And they do test it by PCR. The way in which he swabs himself is like this. It's like, and that's it, and it goes off, right? He may very well have coronavirus, but he didn't even stick the thing up his nose.
Right.
And so certainly sample collection is a point for error. Also, the inhibitors, even though the nasal cavity is relatively, free and clear of inhibitors, the oral cavity is more complicated. The oral pharyngeal and the saliva samples, things like, Mark, I think if I'm not mistaken, no, it was another group that swung by. This group swung by the company and we tested them, and they had just, drunk a lot of coffee or something or other. And so, coffee sometimes can even inhibit PCR in the oral cavity. And so inhibitors, depending on what sample is collected, how it is collected, are going to have the biggest impact on false negative rates. And the third one, you talked about quasi-species. Really briefly describe to the group quasi-species. So coronavirus, like influenza, it's an RNA-based RNA polymerase. So it's an RNA virus. What does that mean? What that means is generally it's replicating a template that's single-stranded. The polymerase itself creates a lot of errors. And so if you look at the entire population and sequence the entire thing, there's errors throughout, every single genome. So the vast majority are not actual viable viruses. And so as a result, it is possible you get mutations where the PCR test lands, and as such, that would result in a false negative result.
Okay. Plausible. Yes.
Mark, when we were up there this summer, the subject of trying to sell to traditional PCR vet testing labs came up, and I kind of got a positive nod from a couple of people because basically you could eliminate some of the skilled labor that it takes to do a PCR test correctly. Is that on the horizon?
We were nodding because it absolutely is, and I'm still nodding to you today. And this is sort of a sign that these negotiations and corporations in general are painfully slow. And so even though there are some massive advocates inside these corporations pushing this, there's also a process that goes into this. And so we certainly expect that some of our sales in 2022 are going to reference labs. And so we see both the hospital as well as the reference lab buying our technology. And, it's one of these things where the sales cycle for a larger corporation like your reference lab arguably is not 6 months, but it could be, 8 months or so. That said, we certainly expect these negotiations have been going on for a long time. We certainly expect them to close, in early 2022. Frankly, I'm shocked it hasn't closed yet. And so,
MyQ Lab doesn't have a 401k, and doesn't have health insurance. So I don't understand why they wouldn't jump on it.
Yeah.
My second question is there such a thing as manufacturers reps servicing the veterinary market? And would you ever consider using those?
So there are certain distributors that basically will sell your product as part of a portfolio, and the issue here is that we have learned that education needs to happen regarding who LexaGene is, and building up that brand, and that has to happen first. So you go into a conference or a vet hospital, like, who the hell is LexaGene? Who are you guys? Haven't heard of you. Then we have to educate the PCR. And there is some technical aspects to educating the PCR without a doubt. And so because of this, we've to date gone through a direct sales approach where we train the people in-house. They come in here, they spend 3 days immersive learning process. If we go through a distributor, you miss out on that. And you also give them a sizable portion of the profit margin. And also there's scaling terms there where not just the instrument sale, but every single time you sell a consumable, having a chunk of that profit. Right. So companies like, for instance, IDEX, the biggest company out there, they were doing distributor-based, sales early on, and they brought it all back and now have direct sales only because they recognize it's the smart thing for their business. For us as a small company, you could argue that's a good strategy, but again, now it comes time to, it becomes an issue of, say we want to partner with somebody. Going back to Cleveland's comment, this might become a barrier because say you've entered into a relationship with party A, but party B wants to partner with you, but also you have something which is blocking. And so we have to weigh as a company, okay, do we want to do this where it might end up making this more challenging, and this is actually better for the company long term? And so for that reason, right now, we're just doing direct. We anticipate staying direct until we enter into, if we do, a partnership with a bigger company that would allow us that same issue of distribution, sales, and marketing, but again, where we're getting a much more favorable deal than just basically being a product within a marketing booklet, effectively.
My last question is, and this is going to, look for your opinion. Is this pursuit of the FDA getting in the way of you making money in these other markets?
No. And so the way for you to view FDA for us right now is that we as a company, we are constantly maturing, and the idea that you start selling a product and everything is FDA compliant is a fallacy. There is a long process in regards to maturing the company, in regards to our documentation, our quality management system, getting ready for ISO 13485 manufacturing, et cetera. So these things are all sort of ongoing. And also likewise, product improvements. The question is for the FDA, the FDA, it's frozen. It's a snapshot of a company and a technology in time that's frozen that cannot be easily modified. So when you go through the FDA, back to the Bio-Rad story, Bio-Rad waited a significant amount of time before going to the FDA to make sure they were going to do it right, because it is expensive and you don't want to have to redo it. And so right now, resource-wise, we are investing in making the company as strong and mature as possible based on the requirements that the FDA will want to see. And so that includes also technology improvements. And so looking at 2022, the idea that we're not improving the technology is should be dispelled. We're always looking to make the system better. And now at what point do we feel ready to go to the FDA, lock it down, have it be frozen, where it's going to then be able to serve the human clinical market for a decade, 2 decades into the future, right? And so right now we feel like the best strategy for the company is focus on these less regulated markets where we can generate revenue faster and spend less money, if you will, trying to chase human clinical. Let's get to the stages of being an early stage company need to be completed before going to the FDA in earnest.
Question regarding that development of the machine itself. And it's kind of an early stage question, really. How many reps have you done on one machine sequentially to verify that everyone is accurate?
So good. I'm trying to figure out how I want to answer this question. And so what happens is our engineering staff builds the technology, and that's all electrical connections, fluidic connections, hardware connections, et cetera. And we're still at the phase where we put chemistry into the system and we put it into a BL1 facility. The BL1 facility basically means amplification to verify the technology works as we believe it should. And then ideally, we test it also on some of the harder targets in the BL2 lab. We need to get to the point where we manufacture it, fluid never goes onto the system, and we're sending it out the door, right? We're not there yet. That said, we are getting very fast at manufacturing and qualifying these systems, much better than we were, say, 6 months ago. But back to sort of the FDA point, we need to be at the point where we do all the hardware, electrical, fluidic connections. It never seeds fluid until it's at the customer site. We're not there yet today. And so these are things that, we get better at every passing month with the company.
But in testing the product and getting it ready for FDA, wouldn't you have to prove that it would work for a continuous 8-hour shift, for instance?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's part of when we did our analytical studies, we had to do, sensitivity, specificity, multiple systems being run. We had to do stability testing. We had to do user workflow changes where it's like, okay, one system's going to be used quite frequently. Others will have delays in using the system. How does that impact things? There's a lot of studies that the FDA asks for, and they literally check every single box to make sure it works as advertised. We'd done a lot of that for the FDA stuff. We just hadn't yet done it at the point of care. We had done it internally. So there's 2 phases of going through the FDA: internal analytical work and then external point of care work. And that point of care work is point of care work in non-technically trained locations like an emergency room or like a clinic, but also a part of it is also in a reference lab, because you actually get, if you will, authorization to operate both in a reference lab and the point of care at the same time if you're going for a clear waiver.
Okay. I was just curious because you were specifying that it goes out as a clean machine, not having been used essentially, but in preparing for FDA clearance on anything, I would think that they would want those sequential tests.
You effectively have to do both, right? You have to demonstrate that, every system when manufactured performs as expected. You have to have a lot of data to support that. And then you have to have data saying, listen, if we never put liquid on the system, we've done enough of these to verify that these are going to work perfectly fine. It's cost effective for us not to spend the time and the labor and the reagents to actually verify wet lab wise that the systems work. And so again, we are getting better and better at shortening the time for manufacturer to validate the system's ready to be shipped to a customer. The ultimate goal is to get to the point where, that validation is all referring to documentation we've done in the past. No wet validation is happening on a system.
Sure. If I can jump in again, where are you with any feedback from the DoD?
So this is the Army placement. And so we have a system down at the Army operating. And so that's great. We're excited because a little bit of background here. We had intended to ship that system in November. The Army, let me describe the study first. The intent here is the Army currently buys anthrax and plague tests from the Navy. Right now, the assays that they use have the PCR assay and the master mix combined together, stored in the freezer. When they need to run a sample, they have to thaw it out, manually extract and purify the genetic material, and test the sample for anthrax. So, contract is with the Army. The Army had to buy the assays from the Navy. The Navy was slow delivering the assays to the Army. By the time the Army got the assays, it was effectively mid-December, and we decided to push off the installation until January. System's now installed, now running. I think we have a data review scheduled for next week. As you might imagine, we don't have visibility in the instrument's performance because the Army doesn't allow you to wirelessly connect to the system in their facility. A lot of veterinarians will allow for that. So if a veterinarian is using the system, we can log in and see what they've run, how frequently they've run, et cetera. And that's fantastic, but that's not possible at the Army. So I think we have our first data review next week. And once the data is fully assembled, then we have to go through the process of approving a press release with the Army. Quick side note here. So the Army is extremely difficult to work with in the sense that getting approvals through their press release, the PR department is very challenging. We've had 2 press releases regarding the Army. The first one went through their approval process. The second one, I started working on that press release and sent it to them a month before we wanted to release it. And I kept on pinging them every week. How's it coming? How's it coming? Has it been approved? Has it been approved? And then finally, I got frustrated. I'm like, listen, if I don't hear back from you guys, this press release will go live in 36 hours. No response, no response. And so anyway, shame on me. I sent it out the door and I got my hand slapped. And so because a week later, they got back to me like, we want to make an edit to that press release. I'm like, oh, well, we can edit it on our website, but it's already in the public domain. And so this is sort of like, again, dealing with the Army where it's just, I'm like, do you guys even work? And so my apologies if any of you guys, worked with the Army or whatever in the past. But anyway, nonetheless, the strategy is complete the study. You're going to talk to the Army about compiling that data. At some point, get a press release out regarding it. The end goal is to compare their chemistry to our chemistry, to what we are doing on this system. It's really actually quite cool. And so again, one of the unique features of our system, we've made our own PCR tests for anthrax and plague that are going into these things, right? In that case, the PCR chemistry is here. The master mix for our system is here. So our system combines the two. We keep them separate. For them, their PCR test and their master mix are combined into a single vial. That is fine if it remains frozen in the freezer, but over time at room temperature, it will degrade and not work very well. So our current fluidic script has us assembling assays from both our tests, where we expect long-term stability for 2 months, versus their chemistry, where we expect degradation in performance over 2 months. That's one of the things we're looking at. But fundamentally, we want to demonstrate to them, hey, listen, it detects anthrax, it detects plague. Hopefully at the start of the study, both are performing equally well. Hopefully at the end, ours is still performing very well. Theirs is down in the dumps. And then arguably, we want to say, listen, we want to build an entire panel for biothreat detection and engage in the contract. And so that's sort of our end goal. Right now, the study's ongoing. I have heard no data yet. I think our first data review is next week.
Very good. And another question, and this is farther along in your development, no doubt. What would be the readiness to engage a manufacturer? You had mentioned back last year sometime that there were people that you had ready when and if. Right.
And so we have, looking at the staff, I think you guys might have met Steve Armstrong. He's pushed a lot of products through the FDA. He's dealt with a lot of contract manufacturers. The system right now, as far as maximizing the dollar that's invested in manufacturing, for us to do it internally now with our throughput levels, our volume levels. If you look back at what we've done historically, and looking back at our press releases, we did engage a contract manufacturer to manufacture the chemistries. It's LaunchWorks, so local to Beverly. And as the pandemic hit, our throughput again, or our volume was relatively low, and they started charging us more and more and more for labor. And we pulled that out of them back to internally. So right now we're manufacturing everything in-house. Once our volume gets high enough, it will make sense to go to a contract manufacturer for both, the chemistry, this cartridge, as well as the system. And so again, this is one of those things where some of these bigger corporations, these strategics who are in our space, have some of their own facilities and might not want us to sort of go and jump into a third-party contract manufacturer. And so right now, as of today, we're focused on internally manufacturing. If we end up staying independent and not doing a partnership, then at some point, once the volume justifies the move, we'll make that move. But as of today, everything's being done internally.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, Jack. I have a quick statement and question too. We have a lot of companies at BioPub that we don't really feel that great about the management, but you, on the other hand, to me, exude honesty and trustworthiness. So I feel very, very good about having you at the helm. The share price doesn't upset me. It allows me to accumulate. I do have a question, though. Has the FDA expressed any concern over your oil separation method that you use in between the tests?
Very astute question. And so right now, whenever anybody reads our management discussion analysis, I'm like, oh my gosh, thank you, because we spend time on that. And, thank you for reading and asking that question. In our management discussion analysis, we do point out the fact that the FDA has yet to date approved any device that, sort of has, if you will, a chaotropic salt, like guanine, thiocyanate, and hypochlorite bleach on the system at the same time. The reason for that is because if you were to take massive quantities and mix them together, you'd develop cyanide gas, right? And so nobody likes cyanide gas, it's a poison, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. When I first started working, started pushing this technology forward, I had engaged Boston Engineering to do some development work, and they were super afraid. The minute I mentioned it's like, oh my gosh, cyanide gas, we're all going to die. And we did the calculation. I engaged some type of a chemist. I'm like, listen, how much volume would there need to be involved here to have this be dangerous? And the chemist that I dealt with did a quick back of the envelope calculation. Like, listen, I believe what you need to have is mix 2 55-gallon drums worth of these chemicals together, pour them into a coffin, sit inside the coffin, and then you die, right? And so the point being is that the amount of fluids we have on this system are really, really small. It's possible you may get, a couple molecules of cyanide gas being formed, but nowhere close to the level that would cause any type of danger or risk to anybody operating the system. That said, if you're in waste disposal and you have a waste accumulation site, you're mixing things together, that certainly could be a risk. So at this point, the FDA has made zero comment on it whatsoever because they will only make that comment after the entire application is submitted. I would imagine that they might come back asking us to do some more valid. I don't know what they might ask, but so some better than back the envelope calculations than we've done in the past. But I am not worried about it. So.
Okay. For the people on the panel, I haven't meant to ignore you. You're off to the right side of the screen, but please feel free to join in. And I need to check the question list here again. Sorry. Let me ask another one or two from Cleveland. Cleveland asked, since you are a razor blade company, why not just distribute Meaky Lab to large vet hospitals?
Just say it one more time again.
Since it's a razor blade business model, why not, give out the Meaky Labs to big vet hospitals and then make the revenue off the testing supplies? I guess he's asking.
So, valid question. We have a reagent rental program where it effectively allows us to retain the assets, place the system, and we charge them a higher cost per test. And the issue, again, it's not, the issue is going through their process at their hospital to change their manner of business in regarding providing testing. And at the surface, it sounds super simple and easy, but the reality is this changes how they do business. And a lot of things have to be started taking into account. And so although we offer that right now from an accounting perspective, we would much prefer them to buy this system. If we have to build these systems and provide them, there's only so much capital LexaGene has to place these systems while they're sort of paying them off. In principle, again, it sounds great, but we want to recoup the capital it costs to actually manufacture the system. That's why we're pushing sales over the reagent rental agreement.
Anybody else from the attendees list, or just feel free to pipe up or type in a question. Typing in is the best way, so I get it in the queue. It's getting a little kind of confused on my screen. Cleveland says again, Dr. Regan, love your answers about possible strategic partnerships. Can you talk about the pet market and the large players in the market? Are they not interested in the LexaGene pet segment? Then that is why a possible strategic partnership makes sense.
Yeah, so quickly go through this. I'm going to have to wrap up relatively quickly here. And
yeah,
so,
sorry about that. Yeah,
the biggest players right now in the vet space. We'll talk about the hospitals and we'll talk about the reference labs. On the hospital side, you really have Mars, the candy company. They own VCA, they own Blue Pearl. So VCA is a massive, corporation of both, large specialty hospitals and a lot of private practices as well. You have Blue Pearl, and which is all specialty hospitals. You have Banfield, and you have Antech Diagnostics. And you want BioVet, and so that's all underneath the Mars umbrella. Mars is a private company, you don't have visibility, but Mars is a massive player that plays both in the hospital side as well as the diagnostic side. And talking to executive management, at these different entities within Mars, they all still operate very, very independently of one another, to the point where it's almost shocking, because they have, of the hospitals, they have VCA, Banfield, and Blue Pearl. Right now, they all operate separately. They can even do diagnostics, not through Antech, which is a subsidiary of Mars, but they can even send their diagnostics off to IDEX. There's no requirement to use their own, basically, family member, if you will, for testing. So Mars is trying to make this better. And so within Mars, the people that makes the most sense for us to talk to, you have the customers being the VCA, the Blue Pearl, and the Banfield. Those are the customers directly placing systems in the hospitals. And then you also have the Antech, which would actually be more of a reference lab. And again, there's interest from all parties with our technology, but that's all within the Mars umbrella. On sort of more the pure play reference model side, you have Zoetis and IDEX. IDEX is by far bigger than Zoetis. If you look at the reference labs, IDEX and Antech both probably occupy about 40% of the market. Probably IDEX is a little bigger than Antech. Zoetis picked up the other 10% of the market. And so we're certainly talking to all those different players, both on the hospital diagnostic side as well as on the reference side. And so, again, you can see partnerships every which way.
Yeah, something is going to result in a nuptials, I think. And Jack, don't let us take your time, but I think what Cleveland and I'll do, take this content, generate a new column to run next week. I would suggest, if you're available, we get you back on the air at BioPub, March, April. The schedule's getting a little full, but you do that. And then for Peter Hoffman, Tom Hughes, RV, Karen, what y'all think? Are we good to kind of begin pushing this stock again at BioPub? And really, I don't see any reason we're not. Really, we've sort of just been overwhelmed for a while and kind of let this one be a bit idle. And I'm as much to blame, probably am to blame, but we can go back into table pounding mode about it. Sounds like we need to. It sounds like the stock is a bargain. It sounds like it has a. RV, tell me what you're thinking. You're smiling.
I am smiling. I like this stock, and I have been accumulating at these low share prices. So
wow.
I'm hearing what Jack has said today.
I mean, I frankly am shocked that the stock price is where it is. And so, again, I love you guys' support. And I do appreciate that. I certainly think 2022 is going to be a good year. I can't imagine it's going anywhere but up from here. And so, anyway.
Peter, Tom, you good with everything?
Everything's fine. It was great, candid conversation.
Yeah.
Listen, guys, I really appreciate your support of me and the company. I really do appreciate that from the bottom of my heart. And thank you. And again, I look forward to talking to you guys in early spring.
Okay, I'll send you a copy of this tape if you just want to keep it, and then we'll get the column out. Might send it to you for some ideas before we run it, and then I'll find a webcast slot. But we're going back into marketing mode at BioPub. We haven't done this for this one in a couple of years. We need to really, I think it's time to move it, and I think we can alter the destiny of it for our people, because we've got a lot of shareholders in it. That's the thing I've been concerned about. There's all these people in it, Jack, all of them, a lot of them.
I appreciate that. And, we need to get a stock price up to make some more happy shareholders.
Yeah. Okay. Everybody good with cutting the tape here? I know Jack probably needs to get going. And Gail, thank you, Gail Winslow. Thank you for helping put this together. Might want to do this again, even. It's very effective, I think. And anyway, I appreciate everybody's participation. Cleveland, thank you for piping in, and we'll be in touch. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everybody else. Take care. Have a great day.
Take care, everybody. Thanks.
Bye-bye.